Talking about tax, well, the best thing is not to pay any taxes. But okay, if that's not possible, then at least you would like to have that 30% ruling and pay less taxes. 30% ruling is a difficult topic, or at least there are a number of pitfalls. It also is debated in Dutch politics about how long it should apply to the internationals. Steven Ten Bokum of the Expat Service, what are the key things to keep in mind when you sign up for a contract or when you apply for that 30% rule?
Well, when you apply for 30% rule, like usually the HR department of your company will take care of the application. But since this is a process that the employee itself will be involved in heavily as well, it's important to be a bit informed about the requirements that you will have to meet and what you will have to meet, the requirements you will have to meet after you have actually gotten the ruling.
And there I can imagine that it makes a difference. Companies like ASML, Philips, VDL, and so on know very well how this works. I guess also he has a lot of experience with the internationals, but maybe smaller companies not, and there could be mistakes made there. And so it's good to take care of and to check the right things.
Yes, and definitely. The first main thing to look out for is that a hard requirement of the 30% ruling is that you are recruited from abroad. This isn't necessarily too big an issue, but more how do you prove this?
But it could be interesting for a student came here to do studies, is already in the Netherlands, someone who came with a spouse and then a spouse applies for sitting step.
Well, yeah, that's true. There is a special exception for if you came here as a student, then under conditions you can still make use, you can still apply for 30% and you can possibly get it. The period that you work here as a student does need to be shortened from the total runtime of your 30% ruling, because that does count. And the biggest problem that we usually see for students trying to apply for it is that they, for example, already had a small side job, to make a little bit of extra money while they were here. And
so that is expensive extra money then?
That's expensive extra money because it basically excludes you from still getting the 30% ruling. A previous employment in the Netherlands basically disqualifies you from meeting the requirements of being recruited from outside the Netherlands because you were already working here, even if that's in a completely different field. So yeah, that's usually the biggest pitfall we see for those people. But if you, for example, came here purely for studies, didn't work here, and then moved into a position with a company where you can get the 30% ruling, then there are possibilities of still getting it. The main thing we would have to do is show that, for example, for the time that you work in the Netherlands studying, that your main connection is still to your home country, or at least the previous country that you were residing in. Showing that you haven't built a relationship with the Netherlands strong enough to be considered a tax resident.
Also sounds like getting out of the country for a week, that's quote 5, that is really high.
No, yeah.
Okay. And then you.
Then the main thing would be the income requirement. There is a income requirement that gets indexed every year. For 2024, for example, this was 46,107 euros. But the main caveat of this is that this needs to be the salary that you earn after you have applied for the ruling. So the 30% ruling exempts up to 30% of your wages from taxes. But whatever remains as your taxable wage, over which tax is calculated, still needs to meet that requirement. So it's not really 46,000 euros you need to earn, it's about 60,000 more that you need to earn to fully apply the 30% ruling. But also just note that if you are above the wage before applying the ruling, but exempting 30% will get you below that criteria, then you can still apply the ruling just to a lesser percentage until you've reached that criteria.
So those are things to think about ahead before you have to start filing tax returns.
Yes. When you file your income tax return every year, the 30% ruling should be fully processed. This happens every month. You should receive your pay slips and your employer pays the wage taxes on that. So when you do get your annual statement, the summary of your income for the year, you don't see the 30% ruling anymore. You see the lowered wage that you get after the ruling has been applied. But you don't have to specifically mention the ruling in your tax return or anything like that. That has fully been processed once you get that police.
And once you're in the Netherlands, you're in or out, or is there a way to repair things if you do not qualify? Maybe not on things like whether you have been hired from possibly in the way that salaries are calculated, or there's in a contract that need to be stated explicitly.
Things in the contract that need to be stated is that you've agreed to it. The employee and the employer need to agree to apply for the ruling together. That's a hard requirement, that is just agreed to, whether that's in the contract or in an addendum that gets added later. But in terms of the salary and other requirements, the main thing that you could repair is if your salary was, for example, too low. We've seen this with a couple of clients before, where they get their annual statement and they see, oh no, my wages are below the minimum for the 30% ruling, which if you could just go ahead like that, means you would lose the ruling and it needs to be corrected for the entire year. And so what you can do to still repair that is file like a supplementary wage tax return. Your employer will need to file this, in which they correct that to the your taxable wage to the credit.
Just asking for a bit more money and then giving it back to your employer. Is that a loophole that is workable? Because these things have been tried, that, let's say, artificially the salary is raised, but that in the end the employer tries to channel some money back from the
okay, so that's part of the
some somewhat tricky way.
Yeah, so you mean when the 30% ruling reimbursement, then that's part of your income in that case, and the exempted part, that part of that is paid back to the employers to kind of share the 30% ruling benefit. This is not something that is allowed. It's basically the law is clearly states that the 30% ruling benefit is for the employee and not for the employer, because the benefit is meant to help them with the costs of moving to a new country, establishing themselves here, and therefore it's not meant to be shared with the employer itself.
No. Screen someone that has such a contract, then you may run into quite a number of court cases to discuss these things.
Yeah,
a situation to call for some help.
What do you mean?
I mean, if you're in a situation that maybe your contract is possibly illegal and that you may run into problems with the tax authorities, you, I guess, better not wait until the tax authorities come speak.
No, but even if there's a problem with the contract, for example, or something with your employment, like for example the wage tax and whatever, as a consequence wrongfully filed, then the employer will be the first one to be contacted, basically.
So thank you very much for explaining about the 30%